Colorectal cancer. It's a term that impacts millions of lives, but honestly, it's often surrounded by a lot of fear and just confusion. So we're going to try and change that today. In this explainer, we're going to crack the code, and the goal here isn't to scare you, it's to empower you. Because really, understanding this stuff is the very first step to taking control. So you might be wondering, how do doctors even begin to figure out what cancer is doing inside the body? I mean, getting a diagnosis can feel like you've been dropped in a totally foreign country with no map, no compass, nothing. But what if I told you there is a map, that there's a kind of universal language that doctors use to navigate this exact terrain? Well, there is, and we're going to learn how to read it. Okay, so this map is called the TNM staging system. It's used by doctors all over the world. The best way to think of it is like a GPS for understanding where the cancer is and what it's doing. And it's actually pretty straightforward. T stands for the primary tumor, N is for nearby lymph nodes, and M is for metastasis, which is really just a fancy way of saying the cancer has spread. So let's break down each of those coordinates.
Let's start with T for tumor. I want you to imagine the wall of your colon like it's a layered cake. Now, what's really interesting here is that the T stage isn't about how wide the tumor is. It's all about how deep it's dug into those layers. A TIS means it's just on the surface, kind of like on the icing. But as you go from T1 all the way to T4, that thing is digging deeper and deeper, eventually breaking through the wall. And that's exactly how it gets a chance to travel. So remember, depth, not width, is what really matters here. Okay, so the tumor's depth, that's just the starting point. The real question then becomes, is this cancer on the move? Has it actually started to travel? And to answer that, we need to look at our next two coordinates on the map, N and M. So next up is N for nodes. Think of your lymph nodes as the body's little security checkpoints. They're part of your immune system, and they're constantly filtering stuff out. If cancer cells manage to break away from that main tumor, these nearby nodes are often the very first place they get caught. N0 is great news, that's the all clear. But an N1 or N2 means, yep, some cells have been found at these checkpoints. And that's our first real clue that the cancer is attempting to spread. And finally, we get to M for metastasis. And honestly, this is the big one. This answers the critical question. Has the cancer traveled far from where it started to distant organs like the liver or the lungs? M0 means no, it's still what we'd call a local issue. But M1 means yes, it has spread. And this distinction is absolutely crucial because it completely changes the game plan for treatment. Let's just pause on this for a second, because this is probably the most important part of the entire map. Think about it like this. N, the node spread, that's a regional issue. The cancer has spread to the local neighborhood, so to speak. But M, metastasis, that is a distant problem. The cancer has essentially caught a flight and set up shop in a completely different city, like the liver. And understanding that difference is fundamental. Okay, so we've got a handle on how to read the doctor's map. But what about our map? The personal terrain of our own bodies. Let's shift gears a little bit from the clinical map to the personal one and ask, what factors in our own lives can actually shape this terrain and maybe even influence whether this whole journey begins in the first place? Right, we're talking about risk factors, and it is so important to say this up front. Risk factors are not guarantees. They're not a crystal ball, they're just statistical links, clues about our personal terrain. And to make it a little easier, we're going to look at them in three big groups: your body and personal history, your daily habits, and of course, your diet. First, let's talk about your personal blueprint. These are the factors you really can't change, but it's so important to be aware of them. I'm talking about things like your age, your genetics, and your family's health history. And some of these, like the link to immunosuppression, might even be a little surprising. But the key takeaway here isn't to worry, it's just to be informed. Because knowing your personal blueprint helps you and your doctor figure out how proactive you need to be with things like screening. Okay, next up, our daily habits. Now this is where our personal choices really start to come into play. The research points again and again to a few big ones: smoking, heavy alcohol use, and just not being very active. Body weight is also a really significant factor. The powerful thing about this category, though, is that these are areas where we actually have some control. Just being aware of them can be the first step towards making a real change. And finally, let's talk about diet, which is a huge piece of this puzzle. Two patterns just consistently pop up in the research:
First, a high intake of red and processed meats is a major risk factor. And on the flip side, a diet that's lacking in protective things, like fiber from fruits and veggies, or calcium and vitamin D, that also seems to increase risk. It's really a story of balance, and what we eat day in and day out over years can truly shape our internal terrain.
So, we've decoded the clinical map, we've read the personal terrain, we've basically learned a whole new language. So what? I mean, why does any of this actually matter for you right now? Well, here it is. This is the single most important takeaway. This knowledge is your tool. It turns you from being a passive passenger into the actual navigator of your own health journey. It means you can walk into a doctor's office and not just listen, but participate. You can ask smarter questions. You can actually understand the answers. This isn't just data. It's the power to have a real voice in what happens with your own health. So, we'll leave you with this question right here. Now that you understand the map and you understand the terrain, what's one step, just one, that you can take on your own health journey? It doesn't have to be some massive life change. It could be as simple as having a conversation with your family, or thinking of one new question to ask your doctor at your next visit. Or hey, maybe just adding a little more fiber to your next meal. Because at the end of the day, knowledge isn't just about knowing, it's about doing. Thanks for joining us.